We call him Mickey Soft Sticks.
He doesn't even say it. He just smacks the sticks. I think we're good whenever.
You good?
Whenever you set that down, we're good. Yeah.
All right.
Ready when you are, Tom.
Michael, thanks for being with us this afternoon. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
First question I need to ask you is, if you don't mind, if you say your name and spell your name, please.
I'm the Reverend Michael Chaney, Michael Chaney.
And do you have pronouns that you prefer?
I like he, him,
Great. Well, thank
I
you.
guess. Yeah.
I'm just going to start off and ask you about you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'd like to find out where you were born, and if you were not born here, how you got here, and if there are things that happened on the journey between when you were born and when you got here that you think are important for us to know. Don't be afraid to tell us those stories as well, okay?
All right. I can talk, Tom. I can tell you some stories.
I'm watching the clock.
All right. Fair enough. I was born in Greenwood, Mississippi. And the day after I was born, my dad was shipped off to Vietnam. I spent my entire life in Mississippi until I was about 20. And Mississippi was a good place to grow up, I suppose. That's what I knew. I was fortunate that I had parents who were good people. They had kind hearts, and their faith was very much a part of their identities and would inform them to be kind and generous people with open and justice thriving hearts. When I was 20, do you mean spend any more time in my childhood? So I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and I suppose it was all right. I really honestly liked the church because when I was a teenager, I got to go to church camp on the weekends, and there were girls there, and that was pretty awesome. So I had this kind of wonderful relationship with the church. I didn't mind being an Episcopalian at all. When my friends who were in the kind of conservative Baptist or evangelical wing of Christianity, their parents were sitting around at bars taking down license plates and trying to figure out who was smoking and drinking. You know, my parents were, and my community was more interested in working with other faith communities and making the world a better place, and I like that. My dad did something really interesting when I was a kid, which is he took me to a lot of different churches. He wanted me to see how other people worshiped and how faith was a part of their lives. So when I was about 13, he took us to our local synagogue, which was interesting. In my little town in Vicksburg, Mississippi, the biggest Christmas party of the year was held by the Jewish Merchants Association. I just thought that all around the world, Jews threw Christmas parties. I didn't know any different. We had a really interesting town in Mississippi. It was very diverse. We had a big Lebanese community, which meant we had a big Greek Orthodox or Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox community. I thought, seriously, growing up, Southern food was fried chicken, collard greens, kibbe, and tabbouleh. That was what I thought Southern food was about. We had a big Chinese population. And, you know, I guess when you're in a smallish town and you're isolated, you don't have the internet, you think that's the world. And it wasn't until I was 20 that I moved away from Mississippi and I discovered something different. When I was 20, I'd gone to college. I went to Mississippi State University for a couple of years, and one of my teachers had suggested that I had to really explore my artistic talent at an art school. So I applied to an art school in Pasadena, California, and off I was going to go. And my mother was very scared. Knowing the little lotus eater that I was, she feared for my life in the land of milk and honey, and she was right to do so. She had made me promise her that I would go to church at least once when I got out to Southern California. And I said, sure. I relinquished, and I said, Mom, I promise I'll go to church at least once. And to abate my anxiety, I said, I'm going to go ahead and knock that out week one when I was out there. I didn't even have a car yet. I found an apartment with some other students at the college, and I walked to the nearest Episcopal church to tick that box off to tell my mother that I had gone to church. I really had no intention of pursuing a deeply faithful life of spiritual contemplation. I was in Southern California to see what the world had to offer. So the first Sunday, I walked into this church, and little did I know it was kind of a renowned church for social justice. I just only went there because it was the closest Episcopal church to where I lived. I walked in the doors, and I don't remember what the priest said that day. and his homily, but I do remember my experience at the communion rail. This was in the late 80s, and the AIDS epidemic had kind of hit an all-time high and it had become a crisis. And in Mississippi, I didn't think I knew anybody that had AIDS or that was visibly dying from it. But when I approached the communion rail, like I'd done for my whole life, I put my hands out and I looked at the man kneeling next to me. And he probably weighed 70 pounds soaking wet. And it was obvious he was dying of something. But he put his hands out and he looked at me and he smiled. And something registered in me that this guy had something. He had something in his heart. And I was moved. I was very moved. I was so moved that I decided to go back to church again the next Sunday on my own. I had already fulfilled the promise to my mother, but this was my choice. So I went and I asked where that man was after the service, and someone had told me that he had died that week. And it affected me deeply. And the same person I was talking to began to ask questions about myself and then asked what I was doing on Wednesday morning. I said, well, I guess I don't know, I have class at 9. And she said, well, what are you doing before class? I said, I didn't really have any plans, probably sleeping. And she said that they were opening a new homeless shelter and they needed some help making oatmeal. So I felt cornered. I felt, okay, I should probably show up, get up early and go make some oatmeal. And that's what I did. And that was my first experience with homelessness. Again, in Mississippi, I'd seen abject poverty. I'd never seen anyone sleeping on a sidewalk on a cardboard box. And this deeply affected me as well. And I began to go back to this church because I wanted to be part of something. And for the first time in my life, I really began to understand what the gospel was really about. I understood what following Jesus was about. It meant loving people unconditionally. It meant seeking justice and seeking right relationships in the community. And I wanted desperately to be a part of that. And that experience began to influence and affect the art making that I was doing at the time, as I was beginning to study filmmaking, as I was beginning to study painting, as I was continuing to explore more deeply what it means to create things and engage an audience with creativity and with art. And what does it mean to have a conversation and dialogue with someone over important issues? So that was a little bit about my youth and how I became invested in a life of faith.
And then you show up in Savannah?
So I took the long route back down south. After I graduated from college, I worked a little bit in New Orleans. I went to graduate school in the Boston, Cambridge area of Massachusetts. I lived in New York City after graduate school, and I was working in television, and I was working on what we now call branded content, and I was doing a lot of working for big corporate clients, and I felt like I'd checked my soul at the door or when I had entered the city. And I began to pine for meaning. I also honestly began to miss the South. And it's around this time that I read John Barrett's book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and thought, wait a minute, there's an art school down in Savannah. I wonder if I could be a part of that. So I sent an inquiry. There was nothing available. I made up with New York City, and we were getting along just fine. And then I got a phone call. And they had asked if I was still interested in visiting Savannah. I said, sure, when? They said, how about this week? And I said, okay, I guess I'll make some time for that. I came down to Savannah, had an interview. I really wasn't sure what I was thinking, but they made me an offer. And I thought, okay, I can do this for 10 weeks. I'm going to come down here for 10 weeks. I'll keep my apartment in New York. I'll go back after this is over. And I'm now 26 years into my 10-week plan. Something about Savannah spoke to me.
What do you think spoke?
I think Savannah has a unique sense of community. I've certainly experienced community in larger cities when I lived in Pasadena, California. Even when I lived in New York City, my little neighborhood had its own community, but nothing quite like Savannah. It reminded me a lot of the diversity that I grew up with in my town in Mississippi. People felt affirming of one another in this community. There was a sense of culture, a sense of holding one another up, a sense of affirmation. I liked that. It was interesting. I felt invited and compelled to explore Savannah. I remember one of the first. I remember Mikveh Israel, Congregation Mikveh Israel, had an exhibition on Chinese Jews, and I thought, this is cool. This is the kind of thing that interests me. And I thought, if a town with a congregation that celebrates this kind of diversity is around, that's kind of the kind of place I want to be.
And you were ordained then?
So here's the thing. I struggled with an ordination, a call. I struggled with a call to ordained ministry. When I was in graduate school, I was walking through Harvard Square, and I saw a sign that said, "How do you answer the call?" And it was a sandwich board, and it said, "Conference today." And it was like a little path that led to this building. And I thought, why not? I got my coffee. I'm just going to follow the path down and see what's going on there. And I walked up into the steps of the Episcopal Divinity School. And there I heard the Reverend Carter Hayward, who was on fire. And she was preaching to a packed room full of people about answering the call and about what it's like to hear God knocking at your heart. And you know that you have to do something about it. And that woman looked clear across the room at me standing in that doorway, and I turned around and I ran. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. I literally put one foot in front of the other as fast as I could, and I ran away from a call. That woman was speaking way too directly to me. And she was speaking something that I knew to be truth and that I didn't want to recognize.
And
So, I'd been in Savannah for a few years, and I'd been involved with a couple of churches, and I found a lovely church home not far from where we are right now. And I pulled the priest aside one day and I said, I gotta be honest with you, man. I got an itch. I feel like there's this nagging spiritual voice that keeps saying, Michael, you're supposed to be doing something more than what you're doing. And I said, maybe it's ordained ministry. Maybe I'm supposed to be doing something else. Perhaps I'm being called to be a deacon. And I remember my priest at the time, he kind of chuckled. He said, yeah, right. Okay, come on. This is good. Let's go talk to our bishop. And I was like, wait a second. I don't want to talk to the bishop. I just thought I was having a moment of, between the two of us. So he dragged me off to talk to the bishop, and I told the bishop how I was feeling. And I remember my dog was dying at the time. And he said, where does God speak to you? And I said, my God speaks to me when I have to pick up my dog who can't walk, and I carry him outside so he can go to the bathroom. And when I pick him back up and I carry him back in and put him on the bed. And I see God talking to me when I sit on a park bench or square and I talk to one of my neighbors who's living outside. I see God when I see someone who's struggling with anxiety or depression. And I see God when I see a queer kid who's struggling with his own identity because he's afraid of what his parents might say. And my bishop started chuckling and kind of like talked to the priest and said, we need to talk about this some more. And so I went to the process. It's a very long process. And I kept telling God, you can't have me. I'm just getting it out of my system so I can say that I got it out of my system. And in the ordination process in the Episcopal Church, you have to sit through a period of discernment where you go into a room with people you may or may not know, and you tell them, I don't know if I'm being called to ordained ministry. I might be, I don't know. And I thought for sure these folks are going to see through me. They're going to say, don't worry about it. Well, no, after a year of that, they said, we think you're in great shape. And I said, no, that's not the answer I was looking for. And so then I went back to my bishop and I said, here's the deal. I got a job. I got a kid on the way. I can't just give it all up to go to seminary. And he said, you're in luck. There's a seminary that has a program when you're off of the teaching schedule during the summer and during your Christmas break. I said, well, I don't know if I'm going to connect to it. He goes, well, it's the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the same place I couldn't run away from fast enough. It was the same seminary. I said, that's the only place I'd ever want to go. So I had a choice, but it looked like the answers were pretty clear at this point. I went to seminary in a very unique and a wonderful program with a focus on anti-racism and anti-oppression. For 4 years, my seminary training was about justice and the gospel, and it was riveting. I was one of the few straight white men in my class. In fact, I was one of two, and I loved it because it took me out of my comfort zone. It asked me to get my privilege in check. It asked me to dig a little bit deeper about what justice means and what equity means and what does it mean to be called into ordained ministry into a culturally rich and diverse world. And I liked it. I liked the discomfort. I liked the challenge. And I liked how it was preparing me for ministering in my beloved city of Savannah that I had fallen in love with.
So that was the question that was kind of rolling around in my mind a little bit. So you're having this experience and you're still rooted in Savannah, right? And now you come back and do you have a new set of eyes? Or is just have your eyes been sharpened? Or how are you different and what happens?
I wish I could say that I was like Paul on the road to Damascus and the scales simply fell off my eyes, but that it wasn't that simple. It wasn't that fast. It was gradual.
Sorry, we're getting a little crosstalk.
Yeah, I figured.
Maybe we can let it pass. Every time we stop, they.
I'm being too long-winded.
No, I think we're fine.
All right.
No, you hearing that, right?
Yeah, it was real loud for a second.
Yeah, we'll shift. I mean, we'll shift gears in a minute. To,
Okay.
It's kind of like I'll say something. That,
He's quiet.
Mike, when I think about you, I think about
Maybe just
seeing you
mention
in
it,
coffee
yeah.
shops. I think about seeing you with people. I think
I
I
don't
think
wanna-
about you.
I don't wanna press it
I'll say
too hard.
something like this is maybe an old-fashioned term. But I sort of think of it as a street minister,
I'm down with that. We can talk about that. Yeah.
right? You know,
Yeah.
we can work from there. And then
Sure.
Then we'll be in Savannah in the street.
Yeah.
And okay.
Mickey's gonna check and see one.
Yeah.
They're probably moved on because we're checking.
Yeah, well, or just close Stephen's door. Just see. Yeah, I think you just close William's door, will be fine.
He might have been on the phone, but it sounded like there were two people talking.
Can you just ask him to close his door to his office?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do.
Okay. Like, I need to tell Mickey to do that, right? Oh, Mickey.
I'm turning to a gearhead. I'm looking at all your stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
I've got the Verano on order.
What's the Burano?
The new Sony camera.
No, I don't know anything about it.
So you know about the Venice?
Yes.
It's the next camera in between the Venice and the FX9. They've come out with a new model.
Oh.
So it's in the Cine Alta line,
Oh, great.
but it's it's got the internal RAW, which is the reason I want to go.
Oh,
for
wonderful.
that. It's got the
Like 6K?
lower version of it. It's an 8K camera.
Oh, lovely.
8.6K.
Wow.
But you can roll it in a 6K mode or 5.8K or a 4K. And I have a set of primes that are Super 35 that I can't use on these full frame cameras.
Right, because
It's sitting on the shelf, and I want to reemploy them. So now
all right.
I've just committed. So
That's a very good excuse.
yeah, so you understand.
I do.
8K.
I don't really care about the 8K because I can't use my Cine primes with the 8K.
Yeah, no.
Anyway,
Doors closed.
all right. I think we're back at it, Tommy. Whenever you're ready.
Sure. So you're back in Savannah, and you're maybe seeing this community a little bit different way, or maybe not. And what happens next?
So after seminary, or actually during seminary, I'm required to do things like clinical pastoral education. I got to work in hospitals to learn how to be a pastor to people in certain situations. I started working at another church that I wasn't familiar with to learn more about Christian education and formation. And I think that gave me an insight to yet other parts of Savannah that I was unfamiliar with. And after seminary graduation, I was ordained as first a deacon and 6 months later as a priest in the Episcopal Church. And my bishop understood that my bread and butter was going to be still being a college professor. I was going to be bivocational. And what did bivocational mean to me in terms of boundaries and what my personal objectives were? I was fascinated still with the arts and how theology and art has a crossover. So I began to go out and start to meet and minister to people working in the arts in our community. And simultaneously, that meant working towards justice issues. I was fascinated with how I could help, or how I could be a part of racial reconciliation, how I could use or check my own privilege as necessary. I was interested in as a straight guy, how do I work with my queer siblings towards justice in those areas? I was interested in how I could work towards environmental justice, and I've still always been interested in how I can work towards eliminating homelessness. So I was assigned to a congregation. I was assigned mostly to area university students and to artists. I worked with an intentional community for a little while. It was an intentional spiritual community that existed for about 2 years, and I was a chaplain to that. And something still wasn't quite there. It just felt like I was on the margins. And then some years after that, an opportunity came up. The diocese was experimenting with the idea of, I guess you could say it's an experimental church. It was a church without walls. It would still be a congregation. And I felt like that was speaking to me. It's hard to put into words, but my gut or my heart said, Michael, I think that's where you need to be. Maybe it wasn't my gut or my heart. I think it was the Spirit. And so I accepted that invitation, and that's where I've been since, with the Episcopal Church of the Epiphany. And Epiphany is, I don't know what you would call it. It's still a church, but we didn't meet in a building. We met in squares, in parks. We met in houses. We had meals. We met in coffee shops. We met in alternative spaces. We met in our local LGBTQ center for a while. We met in a theater for a little while. And now we have actually moved into a church building, and we're part of what we like to see as a larger ecosystem of a lot of things happening in a building, not exclusively our congregation. And also about 5 years ago or so, about a decade or so ago, my friend Jamie Mowry and I were talking, and we had both been involved in a ministry while we were in seminary called Ecclesia. And when I was in Cambridge, I was involved with Ecclesia in Boston Common. And the group there was called Common Cathedral. It was a push cart, and you push it out to the middle of Boston Common. It had sandwiches on it, and you pop it open, you'd feed people, and then after people ate, the push cart became an altar, and we would have a service right there for the people as the people felt comfortable, and we went to where they were. And Jamie did remarkable work of doing something similar here in Savannah at one of our homeless encampments. He created the community of St. Joseph, which was literally a physical community that he and I and other clergy who visited were servants to, and we were visitors. So we would go and we would establish relationships with the people who lived in tents, and we created a community where we could help them help each other. We saw a decrease in the violence in that community. We saw people getting housed. We saw people tending to one another's needs. And that was flourishing until that camp was bulldozed by the city, and that's another story. But I also feel like some people have said there's the sacred and there's the secular. But I don't know. I feel like there's the sacred and the profane, and the sacred is found in a cup of coffee with a friend. And the sacred is found sitting on a park bench having a conversation or watching the sunrise with a new friend. The sacred can be found in our daily lives, not just in a church building on Sundays or Saturdays or whatever day you worship. The sacred is found in all places at all times. We only have to open our eyes and our hearts and our minds to experiencing that. So I think a lot of my theology has led me to places like coffee shops, to the streets, to sitting with people, to marching in protest, to marching in parades, to showing solidarity and support with my neighbors who have been marginalized. And that's where I feel like I am today, still sitting there with people I deeply care about and waiting with them and working with them.
In a given week, I mean, if I were to follow you around, what would I see?
Well, gosh, what do you want to start on Sundays? You got church,
Okay.
You got things that happen after church. You got people who are in the hospital that need a visit. You got folks who text or call you and say, my grandfather's on his deathbed, or I just lost my dog and somebody broke into my tent. You respond to folks. You respond to folks as they need to be responded to, while also kind of keeping my own boundaries in check because I have a family and I've also got a job. I roll into the classroom at 8 o'clock in the morning and I'm there till 3. And in the afternoons, I try to go grab a cup of coffee with somebody. Or sometimes I'll drive by where I know someone camps or sleeps on the sidewalk and I'll just hang out and chat for a little bit with them. I might write emails to folks who make policy and talk to them about the experiences that I'm seeing in the streets. I visit our legislators. Sometimes I bring a friend who is experiencing homelessness with me so that they can hear firsthand what our housing crisis is doing to our community. I try to be a friend to people. I try to be a pastor. I try to be a presence to remind them that they're never alone, that there's something deeper and richer and spiritual in our lives that connects us and binds us to all of creation, and that they're part of a wonderful tapestry. They're woven right in.
Who else in Savannah is kind of walking that path with you, and particularly if there are people walking that path that come from other faith homes? Who would some of those people be?
So I have a little, it's not like a cafe clatch, it's a clergy clatch of like other clergy. We hang out together. It's like Robert Haas, who's the rabbi at Mikveh Israel, and Billy Hester, who's over at Asbury Memorial, David Mester, who's now left Savannah, who's at the Unitarian Church. And of course, I've got my own little posse of Episcopal priests that we all hang out together. It's things like, I remember a few years back, the Islamic Center here in Savannah got tagged with some really hateful graffiti. And Robert Haas called me in the morning and said, "Did you see what happened?" I said, "I did, Rabbi." And he said, "Come on, put your collar on, we're going." It was a Friday. And he came to my house and picked me up, and we drove down to the Islamic Center, and we went there for prayer. Him and his kippah and his prayer shawl, and me and my collar, and we showed our Muslim siblings that they are not alone in this community, that other people in the community have their back. And I think about that, and I think about the kind of caring, deep soul Robert is to call me and tell me, we're going. He didn't ask. He told me. So I know that there are people who are doing it. Jamie's still in town. He says he's retired, but come on, man, that guy, he's still out, moving and shaking.
Well, he was on stage at the naming of the renaming of Calhoun Square.
I heard. I'll admit that I missed that. It was in Atlanta for my other job.
Yeah.
I heard it was a good time, and it was overdue.
Yeah.
My buddy Kevin Weitinger used to live here. He's moved. I miss him deeply. He had a calling at another church outside of town. But Kevin and I were partners in crime. We drive around and sit and talk to people and work together, kind of as a co-ministry team.
Mm-hmm. Do you have contact with like the Korean Baptist Church? They're increasingly, I see like there was a Chinese Baptist Church, the Korean the Baptist Church, etc. Do you have contact with those kind of churches or people from those kind of congregations? Oh,
no offense against the Baptist. I just don't have a whole lot of contact with them. I mean, Jimmy Carter, he was a Baptist. It depends. There are a couple of communities in Savannah. One is called Just, which is a justice-driven community of all faiths, which I'm a part of. Yep. And yes, so we have Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterians, and we've got Roman Catholics, and we've got Episcopalians, and we have non-Christians as well who are involved. Rabbi Haas is involved. There's talk, there's discussion, there's a network of clergy who deeply care about these issues and strengthening the bonds of our community.
I'm going to describe something we heard earlier this morning and just get you to react to it, if I may. So we had someone I've known for a long time who's active at Savannah Christian, now called Compassion, and she told us about several different ministries, one of which was a ministry that focuses on women that are stripping for a living.
Oh yeah.
And 10 women from the church have gone for 10 years and gone into the clubs, and their husbands sit in the parking lots, and they are present and bring food and listen. And I'm curious, is there anything about that that causes you pause?
No.
'Cause I was
I,
if I were going to try to label your kind of interdenomination, your kind of ministry, and the kind of the way you go into the world as someone who is a minister, how would I describe that?
how would you describe
Yeah, how would you want that described?
how I go into the world?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up a weird kid. You know, Mississippi is a pretty conventional place, and I'm probably on the autism spectrum somehow. I got ADD. I'm a creative. I'm constantly, going on walkabout in my mind, and that didn't really quite fit in with the conventions of the place where I grew up. So I'd always kind of felt like an outsider. So when I started to minister to people, I was drawn to the margins. I'll be honest. And when I started to really reread the Gospels, Jesus was drawn to the margins. The Ethiopian eunuch. He's like, "Come on, man." The people that he met, he fed them first. He fed them. The woman at the well, the Samaritans. He crossed boundaries, and that's the kind of thing that tells me I want to be a part of that. I want to transgress the cultural boundaries that we've instituted to keep people separate. I want my faith to break that down. And if that means that I'm going to, support someone who's of a different faith tradition, so be it. If it means that I need to feed someone, so be it. If it means that I'm going to support someone who's going to bring a sandwich or a word of hope to a sex worker, so be it.
What's the most radical thing you think you've done wearing a collar?
You want me to say that on camera?
I'm going to count on you to say whatever you want to say.
The second one.
I remember going. I got no problem going into bars wearing my collar, and I know that for some people that's an issue, right? But it's like I like a beer every now and then. And I remember going into the Legion one time. I was getting off out of a church service, and on a Wednesday night or something, I went in and I saw Sarah behind the bar. And she's like, "Halloween was over 6 months ago," and I'm like, "Sarah, you do know that I'm ordained, right?" And her jaw dropped. She says, "No, I guess I didn't." So I was relatively, new. And sometimes I like to go into bars, and I like to go to dive bars wearing my collar. Because inevitably someone's going to ask me a question. Like, are you here for fetish night, or are you really a priest? Which is a true question. That's actually a question I heard. So that always leads to a conversation. And if I can have an honest conversation with someone and I can establish a rapport, a relationship with them, great. I'm not there to judge. I'm not there to proselytize. I'm there to witness. I'm there to be a supportive voice and to remind people that they're not alone. I'm there to be a pastor. And yeah, I think you can be a pastor in a bar. I think you can be a pastor I know you can be a pastor at a rally. I was honored when the mayor asked me to speak at our Black Lives Rally March in 2020 on the steps of the Capitol. And I get it. I spoke about my own privilege. And I spoke about the fact that people who look like me need to support people of color. And we need to support real, honest justice. So I did the same thing at like a trans rights march last year. I was honored to be asked to be there and to speak. I get it. I know my position and privilege. I want to be able to speak from a place of support and to talk to people who look and are from the same place of privilege as I am, to understand what that privilege is and how they can use that for a more just and equitable world. So yeah, I've been to a couple of rallies wearing my collar. I've been to some bars. What's the most radical thing I've done? I don't know. I think radical is sitting on a cardboard box with somebody and sharing a sandwich. Because a lot of people just don't want to look at someone. I remember going through Johnson Square. You get to know people, you get to know their names, and you become more comfortable with them. And I remember walking through Johnson Square and seeing a friend Darian, and literally sitting on his box with him on the cardboard in the middle of the square. As the tourists are coming through, completely ignoring him until I sit down, and all of a sudden, they're going to look. If I can use my privilege to say, guess what? You can't turn away from the fact that people live outside. And then 2 weeks later, he OD'd, and I had to trace him down at the hospital. We didn't know if he was alive or dead, but I went to the hospital to visit him because that's what you do.
What other places have you been? I mean, that brings up an interesting point. What other places have you been to be present to people? You've been in hospitals, you've been under bridges, etc. Keep going. What other places?
Where I've been present to people, wherever they need me to be. I've been with people in, as you said, hospitals, in bars, sometimes sharing a sandwich on a sidewalk. I've been with people in parades. I've been with people in protest rallies. I've been with people in their own houses of worship, which may be different from mine. It's wherever I feel called to be and where I feel like I am serving. Yeah, you name it.
Can you imagine growing old together with someone is a radical act?
Yeah, it is. It's funny. It's like yesterday was Valentine's Day, but it was also Ash Wednesday. And on Ash Wednesday, in the Christian tradition, we are reminded of our own mortality. It's a day that we smudge ashes on our foreheads and tell ourselves that it is from dust that we came and it is to dust that we shall return. We are mortal. The short message, the homily for that day is we're all going to die. Like it or not, it's going to happen. So what do we do with ourselves right now? How do we reorient ourselves to that thing that is sacred and holy and all-encompassing of creation, of which we are all a part? How would we reorient ourselves to that, which is now we're in the period of Lent. But since it was on Valentine's Day, I was also thinking about, my own marriage and my own children and that radical act of being in a relationship. And my wife's gave me a really beautiful card. It says, sometimes we roast marshmallows on this dumpster fire. And it just, that's why I love her. Because sometimes it is a dumpster fire. You just make the best of it.
Are there questions that I can ask you that would allow you to say something that you've not said so far?
I don't know. I feel like I've been talking about myself, and I feel like I should be talking about this community.
Well, I guess we can do that. Let me come to that. I'm curious, that's interesting. I'm going to come to that from the other side a little bit. Do you see things that you consider to be almost like, in politics today, there's an awful lot of performance politics.
Sure.
It's just not taking us anywhere, it's performance politics. Do you see the same thing with regard to the idea of interfaithness?
So I think sometimes, certainly with politics and interfaith dialogue, there's performance politics, there's virtue signaling of like, yeah, we get along and put our hands around each other, and then we go and we make policy that negates and nullifies what it is we just did. It's like you can't say we care about the people who are living on the street and then turn around and create policy that doesn't create affordable housing. Sure. Sometimes and too often we go to our houses of worship on the weekend and then we check out of that for the rest of the week. For the next 6 days, it's all about business as usual. It's about the status quo. And I think we have a responsibility as people of faith to push back on status quo.
Who do you think is doing some of that heavy lifting right now in the faith community in terms of getting outside their own congregational walls, maybe their own personal wall, and pushing forward? Who are some of the people that are really working on that now?
Who are trying to get out of their own comfort zone. And, I mean, I always go to my Episcopal colleagues. Guillermo Arboleda, I think, is doing great work in the community, particularly with Just. David Lindbergh has a big heart for people who are unhoused, and also connecting with other folks in the community. Hunt Priest is doing some remarkable work about that intersection of psychedelics and spirituality. I'm trying to think who else who's coming to mind. I'm probably going to walk out and kind of kick myself in the head. Billy Hester. Billy's unafraid to talk to people who aren't Methodist. He hangs out with me. Robert, certainly. I mean, this is my tight little circle, and I'm sure there's lots of folks. Scoggins-Berg is doing interesting stuff with One. He used to have a church here in town, but now he's working on policy. And he's working towards like AIDS relief in Africa. And he'll call me in a heartbeat and be like, "Hey, can you go to Washington, D.C.?" And I'm like, "No, but thank you."
Are there stories you've heard, I mean, just through the years, are stories you've heard about examples of faith in action in the past in Savannah that have been inspiring to you? It might come from the civil rights movement, or it might come from other moments in time. Have there been those kind of stories and tales that you've been able to catch?
Yeah, but I forgot.
Welcome to my world.
Right. I mean, I know that there are stories from the civil rights era. I'll say that during the Black Lives Matter protest, we saw a lot of faith communities coming together. We saw a diversity of people who were coming together across race and faith and numerous other barriers to step up and to speak for Black lives. That was exciting. We've seen it with creation care. Creation care is it's kind of a catchphrase. It means environmental justice. And when we talk about environmental justice, we also have to talk about environmental racism. So I think folks are coming together. I'm seeing more people concerned about homelessness now. I don't know if what we can do other than provide direct relief until housing inequality is really addressed. That's my soapbox.
No, I hear you.
I wouldn't mind getting his sort of general take on Savannah's housing issues. And
I'm gonna get myself in trouble.
well, I mean, in general platitudes, right? Not
Yeah.
pointing fingers at specific figureheads and what have you, but just sort of like acknowledging that it's an issue is sort of the first step, right? And it seems that that's starting to happen a little bit more,
Yeah.
as you've already alluded to. But I think that it's not peculiar to Savannah, but it's especially like it's high relief in Savannah. It's pretty sharp.
Yeah.
What's happening. And so I don't know. I think that's sort of it's bringing people together in a way that is perhaps going to finally address an issue that needs to be addressed. I mean, that's just sort of my own words, but anyway, I would like sort of your general take on that issue in general, because it is sort of an issue that's bringing Savannahans together.
Responding.
Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
No, totally. So when I first moved here, 26 years ago, I was captivated by Savannah's charm. It reminded me a lot of the town that I grew up in. It was a historic town in the South. It had a lot of Spanish moss. It had a lot of charming people. It had a lot of eccentrics. I like eccentric people. Sometimes I might be one of them. And I quickly fell in love with the place. And like everyone who comes to Savannah, you're charmed by the historic district. And I live just on the edge of the historic district, as I've lived there for 25 years. I lived on Gaston Street for a year, and then I got a house in a neighborhood nobody wanted to stop and visit in, which now is quite desirable. But over the years, I've seen the downtown historic district change. I think we've all seen it. It's become a tourist mecca. It's become almost like a theme park. And that means the folks who actually live there can no longer afford to live there. They've been displaced. And I've seen a new Savannah arise. And it's places like in Starland or in the Waters Avenue corridor or places that I'm still learning about. I'm learning about places like, I'm learning about East Savannah. I'm learning about neighborhoods in West Savannah that are now places of renewal. We still, though, are part of what's happening nationally with the housing crisis. There are folks who have 3 or 4 houses, while so many have none. Rent is climbing. People just simply can't afford a place to live. And that's the root cause of homelessness. People can ask, well, is it mental health or is it substance abuse? No, it's not being able to afford a place to live. It's that simple. At our pancake supper on Shrove Tuesday, I spoke with a woman who, for the first time in her life, is living in her car. And she's 74 years old. And she's been living in a car for 4 months because she lost her lease on her apartment. And she just can't afford a place to live. And she's a eloquent, well-spoken, wonderful conversationalist. She's quite passionate, but she simply can't afford a place to live on her income, living in her car. I don't know what to tell her. I sit with her, I listen to her, and I feel the injustice. I want to go rent her a place to live, but I can't. So we're part of what's happening on a kind of a much larger scale. And I know all politics is local, and we have to kind of look at the broader cultural picture of who we are as a country and who we are as a people and what our priorities are. So Savannah is certainly part of a national trend towards unaffordable housing. And we're going to have to create some policy, and we're going to have to create some incentives for remedying that. We have to create a system where people have a place to live. What that is, I don't know. I'm not a policy wonk. I'm a pastor. I've been reading a lot about it, but we have in Savannah a lot of places that people could live in. There's a lot of old places that could be redone. We could create a revolving fund. I'm a huge advocate for something called Housing First, which is part of harm reduction. It means you put somebody in a house first, then you can address substance abuse issues, then you can address mental health issues and physical health issues and establish work relationships and a landlord relationship. But if you try to do all that stuff first as a precursor to getting into a house, there are barriers. It also saves money. And that's statistically proven that it saves money putting someone in a house first and then addressing those issues. We have the resources to do it. It's whether or not we really want to allocate those resources.
And it may be rethinking what the word "we" means.
Yeah. We. Yeah, who's we? We is all of us, even if we don't want to be part of we, because our actions have an impact on our neighbors. Everything that we do, whether we choose to smile at somebody or bark at them over our morning coffee, whether we choose to wave at them at a stoplight or give them the middle finger, that's going to have an effect on our community. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good stuff. Thank you.
So, you remind me of Sammy Clark.
I don't know Sammy Clark, do I?
Go talk to some old Savannahans.
All right.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Billy knew him, right?
Yeah,
Billy?
let's end it there. Just do some research on Reverend Sammy Clark.
I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you something I hadn't shared with too many people, and I don't know where this is going. I had 2 job offers last year out of state. They're pretty good. I didn't want to leave Savannah.
Right. Were they in more progressive towns?
Yeah.
More progressive cities?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, you're into mission work, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then that's about it.
Damn it.
It's right. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. Seriously, stay here. Here's where you're needed.
I've gone through that with folks who are like, well, why do you want to stay there? It's like, well, I'm part of something.
That's worth it too.
Yeah, it's worth it. I'm part of something. We're doing good work.
That's right. I mean, you used to go live in Asheville.
Right.
Go live in,
Can't afford to live there.
no, but these days,
Yeah.
Good. All right, well, thank you very much. That's all.
Did I answer all your questions?
Well,
We've
been at it for 12 hours.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, two things. One, we've been here and we've been hearing what other people have to say. Right? So, in totality, we have heard a lot today.
Okay.
And you're part of that much bigger kind of picture, okay? So for example, we had a good long kind of description.
Okay, great, good.
So I mean, when I put this whole thing together, at least in my mind, I'm thinking, we have heard a lot of stories today about ways that people of faith have figured out how to be, to cross boundaries, connect, and do things for the common good, which is what we're looking for. We've had lots of those stories. And we've heard stories about how individual people have personally decided they personally want to get out of their own comfort zones and what a friend of mine once called their own relationship ghettos.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, their own relationship ghettos and be with a broader group of people.
Can I speak to that and I'll try not to preach a homily here. I might a little bit, which is I deeply believe that you want to call it the cosmos, you want to call it the great spirit, you want to call it God, whatever you're comfortable with. There's that cosmic fabric that we are all woven into. Every faith tradition should, I think, point us to acknowledging that we are part of something and that we are part of something really good. And that faith tradition should cultivate goodness. That faith tradition should cultivate the beloved community. So it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Zoroastrianist, our tradition should bind us together. We're on similar paths, all leading toward the same destination. Let's have some respect for one another and let's shoulder the burden on the road because we are pilgrims together.
I think that's our close.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
All right.
That was great.
That was a short homily. That was okay.
Wish my congregation probably is thinking, I wish he preached that short on Sundays.
Well, that's a joke. I've never heard a bad short sermon. Or I've never heard a very short speech. That's that joke.
Oh, yeah. Do you know Frank Logue, who's the bishop?
Yeah.
So, Frank actually preached at my ordination, and my bishop at the time says, dang, Frank, that was 3 of the best sermons I've ever heard.
Oh.
He was a little long-winded.
Clever backhand.